Hello and welcome again to The Conservative Historian. The date is June 2020 and the subject is the many kinds of political history. One of the awesome parts about history is the depth and breadth of the subject in and of itself. There is political history, economic history, military history, social history. There is subaltern studies. And within the academy today, obviously, there are histories on race, imperialism, gender, all kinds of things. What I want to talk about today is primarily political history. And within just political history, all of the different ways upon which that subject is covered. So let's start off with what one would think would be typical history within the political sphere. This is The Rise of American Democracy by Mullens, one of the most prominent of our historians. He teaches at Princeton. His name is on all kinds of documents and commentaries in regard to the genre. This guy is over 900 pages long. The notes and index pages are huge. In other words, Mullens is that true scholar. He's done all of his homework. And it takes him actually a long time to write these types of books. Another one would be An Empire of Wealth by John Steele Gordon. In both of these cases, you're not talking about a specific figure, but a specific time and place within the history of our republic. And a lot of different characters and a lot of different subject matters are included. And again, these are sort of what would be considered to be pure scholarship. Another historian, unfortunately no longer with us, is Barbara Tuchman. Now, unlike Sean Mullens, Barbara Tuchman was not a full-time professor. She was a full-time historian. I'm looking right now at the Zimmerman Telegram, a relatively short book for her. It would take Tuchman years between her books because her scholarship had to be so tight and she was so intense about it. Now there is another subgenre of history called popular history. I'm not a fan of that. I think to say popular history somehow implies that the scholarship that goes into these types of works isn't as rigorous, isn't as comprehensive, isn't as tight as would these other areas. Perhaps the best known of these popular historians might be somebody like David McCullough, but also Ron Chernow. And interesting that in his Hamilton, he now has a little Lin-Manuel Miranda of Hamilton the musical, probably the best thing that ever happened to the sales of his books. I always sort of wonder whether Chernow gives a royalty over to Manuel Miranda given the success of the musical and probably what it's meant for his book. Another very popular Chernow book is Grant. Chernow books are also called, which is even worse than popular history, dad history. And I think that's sort of funny. Yes, I'm a dad, and yes, I read Chernow. I also read Mullens. I also read Tuchman. I read a whole others. I read Coates. So my historical readership extends across all spheres. But I definitely do like these, but just to say it's dad history almost diminishes the ability of somebody to get something out of it. But now there is that further extension of history, the kind of history that I'm not necessarily a fan of. And that is the type of history written by a celebrity, almost always a celebrity journalist, and almost usually a journalist who happens to be on the right of things, who writes history but doesn't really write history. What they do is they have somebody with them, the with side, or an and side, or the author's name in big bold letters, the celebrity author, and then down below you have the other guy. The ability of this kind of model to write mass production is pretty fast, and the other challenge with it is because they use their popular platform, often TV shows, to promote their books and thus crowd out all of these others. Even Ron Chernow doesn't have that kind of a platform. 3 million, 2 million, 4 million viewers to look at them Here's an example right now that I'm going to call out Brian Kilmeade, who's a Fox contributor, and you'll notice the and, Don Yeager. Perhaps the greatest progenitor of these types of books. Perhaps the greatest use of this kind of thing was Bill O'Reilly and his Killing series. Bill O'Reilly's name was prominent. Bill O'Reilly marketed the heck out of those books. I don't believe Bill O'Reilly actually wrote the books. Martin Dugard did. His name is on all of them. He has the and Martin Dugard. But Martin who? Bill O'Reilly could use, at the time when he was on Fox, before he became discredited, could use that platform to sell his books. Now again, that's the problem with that. It's conservatives often selling good history as opposed to bad history, such as the 1619 Project, which isn't really history at all. It's a narrative that cherry picks individual and isolated events to try to build this entire narrative of America being evil. And wouldn't I contend that this is good? The only problem is that contention locks out and takes the market away from people like Chernow. You notice there's no width on this book. He wrote it himself. He did the work. And these things are hard. I've written history for years. It is hard. It is hard to look up all the research, to find all the facts, to put together the narrative, to check all of the proofing. These celebrities probably don't do any of that. The with and people take care of all of that piece of it for them. So that's one of the reasons, too, why O'Reilly was able to crank out these books at the rate of every 6 months while also doing his TV show. I mean, how is that even possible? Well, it's possible if you're not actually writing the book. Am I saying that there's somehow a falsity to this? No. A ghost writing would be a falsity, that I wrote the book but somebody else wrote it, and I'm certain that goes on in celebrity circles as well. I have no doubt that Mullens wrote this book, no doubt that Chernow wrote this book, or Tuchman or Gordon. Do I doubt that some of these guys wrote these books? Yes, I think there were ghost writing involved, but in this case they're basically admitting it. If not, then why put that other person in there? My point is simply this. When selecting your books, because if you're watching this right now, you probably love history as much as I do, but you, like me, have limited resources. You can only buy so many things. Just keep that in mind when spending your hard-earned dollars on history. Thank you.